name Bishop Bullwinkle. I got the first church, nothing but the truth. What you say? Deacon Kyle, Deacon George, Deacon Clay. Open up the door and turn them loose. Come on! First I wanna thank God for the blood running warm in my veins. Yeah, I thank God for my life, health, and strength. I got a sound mind, I'm not insane. Come on! I ain't gonna preach too long. I ain't gonna take the service too far. My sermon this morning, hell to the no, no, no. Come on, hell no, to the no, no, no. Yeah, to the no, hell to the no, to the no, no, no. Listen, Sister Edna, Sister Ruth, make sure that everybody gets a seat. Come on, y'all. Sister Lily may go back in the kitchen, cause when I get through, I need to eat. I must fix me collard greens and cornbread and rice. Chicken breast, oxtails on the side. That's what I'm talking about. Deacon Underwood, get my Bentley ready, cause when I get through, I need a ride. Come on! Dr. West, count the money, come back and tell us what you raised. We ain't to find another deacon. I got some people there looking for some blessings. First, God got to get the praise. Come on, y'all! See, there's an old saying, when the praises go up, you get the blessing coming down. I got some people in the church, God Almighty, look at them, they messing around. Come on. Woo. Hell no, to the no, no, no. Hell to the no, hell to the no, to the no, no, no. Listen, I got people in the church smoking weed, drinking whiskey, they drinking a lot of gin. What you say? I got the preacher with the night prayer meeting, talking about can I get an amen? Come on. Early Sunday morning, about 10:15. Yeah. I got some people, they coming off the street, and God Almighty, look at them, they strolling in. They need help. They laying at the altar, they confess to sin, their sin. Come on, wait. Time to see them Monday morning, they doing the same thing again. Hypocrite. Hell no. Come on. To the no, no, no. Hell to the no. Hell to the no. To the no, no, no. Listen. Got kids dropping out of school, talking about they don't want to learn. Yet they're standing on the corner rolling blunts, talking about come on, let's earn. Y'all better get back to school. I got kids walking up and down the street, pants hanging down around their knees. Woman pants talking about that they're looking for a job. When I see them get a book, I said please talk to them. But see, all they ever talk about, brag about who got the biggest and the baddest guns. Trying to see the copper with the bubble top. They dropping the gun, they wanna run. Put them guns down. Now the sheriff got them locked up. They sitting in the county jail. It's a shame. I heard the mama, she was crying all night. She can't get no money for the bill. Come on. Now the man with the home run, cause they didn't put no money in the commissary. Your friend gone now. They had you in the jail, brother, man. You were sure headed for the cemetery. Come on, wait. See, there's an old saying that a hard head make a soft behind. Yeah. Well, since you did the crime, go on do the time. Stop it, baby, crying. Come on. Hell no. To the no, no, no. Yeah, to the no. Hell to the no. To the no, no, no. Listen. When people talk about you, all you gotta do is let them talk much as they please. That's what they gonna do, y'all. Cause all you gotta do is get down on your knees. Tell the Lord about it. You tell God about it, and I guarantee you, He will never leave you alone. Yeah. All you got to do is tell the devil, hell no, won't you leave me alone? Devil, leave. Hell no. Come on, wait. To the no, no, no. Come on. Hell to the no. To the no, no, no. Come on. Hell no, no. To the no, no. To the no, 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 no. To the no, no. To the no, no. Hell to the no, no. Hell to the no, no. To the no, no. Hell to the no. No, 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 no. Hell to the no, no.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, hell to the no.
I have real questions. Why is there a monkey statue, a fire extinguisher, and he clearly didn't need the bike? So why did he bring it?
I think that's his thing. He's the guy, he's Bishop Bullwinkle with the bike. Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
I've sold bikes for many years. Okay.
Well,
I think that song. I hope that there were churches, and I mean many churches, who had that printed out so that their congregation could sing along on Sunday mornings. I hope so.
it's actually a good song. It's
It's
really
very
funny.
catchy, and it has a great social commentary about how maybe we shouldn't walk around with our pants sagging, do drugs, and brag about who has the biggest gun. You know,
Yeah,
they're more
yeah,
important things. But
absolutely.
it wasn't very much about God. That's for sure. Where's Jesus in that thing? Does he even get a mention? I
He
need to look
mentioned
up the
God a
lyrics.
couple times. He
You
mentioned God
mentioned
a couple.
God. I don't think he said
No,
Jesus,
I don't
but
know.
maybe he
Jesus.
did.
No, I don't know. I don't know about Jesus. Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Hot Program. I'm your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast. And as always, I am in airplane mode, and now a man who smiles wildly when Christians talk to him about miraculous healings after surgeries performed by qualified, skilled doctors and technicians. A man who needs no introduction. How you doing today?
Hey y'all, to the y'all, to the y'all, hey y'all, to the y'all. My name is my one black friend. I got the first church and nothing but the truth. Shut up. Carrie Ann, Liz Allen, open up the doors and turn them loose.
Oh man, that
I
was
was
a
not
good
prepared
one.
for that. If I was more prepared for that, I would be definitely prepared for that.
Yeah, that's a song my one black friend's mentioned a bunch of times, but
A bunch of times.
I pulled it up, and when I finally saw it, I said, I gotta play this on the show. This is epic.
Like, can you imagine Jesus and his disciples roaming around the Levant? And if that was the congregational song that they sang before every sermon, before the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus up there, hell no, no, hell to the no. And, Peter and Paul, Paul wasn't there,
I
but,
feel like
Peter's stepping along.
Family Guy or Franklin or one of those shows. I feel like I could see doing a great segment with that song, or South Park even.
Or South Park, yeah.
I popped my friend Steph up there. She just played in the video after. But Stephanie Helms just got over 200 subs, and also recently qualified for the J24 World Championships next year in Seattle. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to Stephanie Helms' channel. There is a link in the description. All right, today we are going to be debunking John Lennox. It's a voice you hear a lot, and I don't see a lot of debunking videos about him. So this is from The Sound of Science. I'm actually really interested in this. Before we get started, don't forget tonight, Maya Atkinson and I will be doing Bad Science Sunday over on Maya's channel. So there is a link in the description. So go ahead and subscribe to Maya Atkinson's channel if you are not already. All right, let's go ahead and Autobots transform and roll out, and then we can blow upshuate this little situation right here. And all right, here we go.
Hello, welcome to The Sound of Science,
There
the
you go,
place
Liz.
where we deconstruct unscientific, bogus, and silly scams. Let's go get them. Hello, my fellow critical thinkers. Welcome back to another video in which we finally take on the former professor of the University of Oxford and most profound Christian thinker in the world, John Lennox. At least, from what I've heard, many Christians see John Lennox as their ultimate intellectual champion. Go listen to John Lennox. He will crush your arguments, they keep telling me. This is a man who many Christians think destroyed Richard Dawkins in a debate about evolution. So it's about time to see if John Lennox really is what his fans claim he is. And I've been looking forward to finally take the opportunity to analyze the arguments of John Lennox, because I've been debunking the silly nonsense of people like Frank Turek, Ray Comfort and William Lane Craig for over a year now, and none of them offered me any challenge. That's not because of me, that is because of their arguments. Those arguments prove nothing and are often laughable. Anyone who finished high school can debunk those charlatans. All you need to do is sit down, listen to their words, let those words sink in and analyze what they say step by step and in full detail. When people like Frank Turek, Ray Comfort and William Lane Craig engage in live debates, they spout their nonsense at a very high pace. They make unsubstantiated claims in about every sentence. That makes it pointless to engage with them in that format, because the time frame does not allow for you to address all of their bogus, so then they get away with huge quantities of hogwash. But luckily there is YouTube, and YouTube allows me to dissect their gibberish step by step and in full detail. And that is exactly what I'm going to do with John Lennox in this video. And of course, I hope that he is in a different class than the apologist fools I mentioned earlier. In this video, I will discuss the lecture of John Lennox at the University of Oxford, which is titled "God Does Exist." Lennox delivered that lecture in November of 2012, and it is often referred to by Christian apologists as one of the strongest pleas for the existence of a God. So let's see what Lennox has got to tell us.
Talking to you two, punk. I don't think this one it's not super long.
Thank you very much, ladies.
I will just say that this is a common problem that I agree. That first off, the intellectual side of Christianity is an oxymoron. Expecting intellectual integrity from people who don't actually pursue true careers in academia and research topics is, I think, a misguided expectation. But I can totally relate to wanting a challenge and hoping that there's some apologist out there, that there's some Christian out there that is going to make a good argument or make a good case, and that you're actually going to struggle to deal with it. Spoiler alert, I don't think John Lennox fits the bill. That's issue number one. But I think part of it, I wonder what you think, my one black. I think part of it is wanting to feel less silly about our former belief. Like, it's kind of disappointing that there's no one that defends the faith you believed for decades adequately, and you kind of feel like it would be nice to find at least one, because then it would make the belief seem more reasonable, make your former belief seem more reasonable. Maybe that's what all the Christians who won't deconvert are hanging on to. But I still have not found that person. So
I think a lot of what I saw in church, and I guess what I see now when people tell me they're a Christian but they don't attend a church, or anything of that ilk, right? They don't even have a Bible study, no regular meeting. They just actually, maybe no regular meaning is possibly a better way to say it, but the gathering together to reaffirm the faith, to build one another up, is often absent in lives today, in Christian lives today. We've seen a drop since COVID of church attendance.
Right.
Well, are those people still Christians? We don't. I don't know that a study tells us if they are, if they believe they still are. I think in modern times, people are realizing they don't need it. Sort of like with my intro, someone's telling me about this miraculous healing and all that stuff, and I'm like, that's fine, but a lot of very talented doctors and technicians worked to heal your friend, your family member, your loved one. And
Right.
prayer had little to do with it. You know, not even the parking spot you got when you dropped them off. Prayer didn't have anything to do with that either. That's chance. However, the surgeon's work, the technician's work, that's skill.
Yeah.
Maybe some people died in the creation of the procedures. Like I have one of the like top doctors in the world is one of my cardiologists for my heart. That lady, she's on another level, but she got there because she worked her tail off. I don't know. I guess I could ask her when I see her, hey, did you pray about your education at all? Or did you just work your tail off?
Yeah. And
You know?
and it's interesting that people gain excellence in that the same way they seem to gain excellence in anything else. You know, so for instance, if I see a Michelin 3-star chef or whatever it is, I'm going to think that that's incredible. You know, you're on another level, but Michelin gives out 3 stars to 3-star restaurants every year. And there
are a lot of
you know, people, you know, getting that rating is a common ordinary occurrence. So that's really interesting. And then the other thing that interests me about that is they do it all the time. I remember I was watching a video about Ronnie Coleman. He used to be sort of the king of bodybuilding, won 8 Mr. Olympias, but his body has suffered tremendously as a result of it, and he's had, I don't know, 11 or 13 surgeries or something like that. He's got an actual cage in his back. So I'm watching some doctor break down in a video about his surgeries, and it was just so interesting because he would start talking about certain procedures that would go on with him. I also watched that same doctor talk about Deion Sanders, one of my favorite athletes. And he'll say stuff like, oh, you know, yeah, that's this procedure. Oh, that's one of my favorite surgeries. Oh, yeah, and he had this thing. Da, 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 da. Yeah, oh, I love that surgery. Yeah, that's one of my favorite surgeries to do. We do that on a regular basis. What am I getting at? That thing that feels like a miraculous healing when it happens to you or a family member or a friend is literally an ordinary day at work to them. It's not to say that they do those. It's not to say they do those surgeries every day, right? But they do them every week. They do them a couple times a month. And the success rate is mundane. Matter of fact, they're so good at it that you will sue them if they don't get it right. Right? Like you go out. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to jump in here. That's such a great point. When I was discussing the surgery to implant the defibrillator in me the first time, I wondered, like, why they're just so matter of fact about everything when the doctors would talk to me about this. Here's what it looks like. Here's how it's going to change your life. Here's, you know, what to look out for. You can't do this anymore. Don't buy that welder because you won't be able to use it. You know, things like that. And I said, wait a second, is this just like a normal thing? Like, oh yeah, you go home the same day. Unless your surgery is late in the afternoon or something like that.
Right.
Or there's a complication. But there's almost never a complication. I'm like, wait, this is just a basic thing? Yeah.
Yep.
When one of the doctors was doing an angiogram on me, I was astonished. Like, they don't even put you to sleep. I was awake for this. And I'm laying there going, this is kind of amazing. And then I just said to them, like, guys, I guess internally I'm not that exciting, so I'm just going to go to sleep. And I fell asleep. They woke me up when it was time to go, go home. And it's just so routine. Even the second time for the second defibrillator after I almost died last year. No problem. We got this. And it was just I'm telling you, just such an ordinary thing for them to do.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of Christians need, if they believe that it's Jesus doing the work, the Holy Spirit or God, they need to happen what I had happen, not the severity of my situation, but the discussion, to have the doctor just talk to you about, here's what we do about this. It's very basic. and we're done in a couple of hours, and you're home the next day.
Right.
It costs $75,000, but who cares? Don't worry about money. Let's not talk about money. Now, if Jesus is really working for you, he'll take care of that bill.
Yeah.
Not even a copay.
That would be miraculous.
A lot of people, they get bankrupted after a surgery like that.
Yeah. And that's crazy too. I think I was recently hearing that's one of the reasons American parents are the least happy, is just because of the sheer expense of it all. And it really is a shame that we live in a society where most of us will lose most of our accrued assets and income in the later stages of our life due to medical expenses. And we all know those expenses are coming. So it's
I have a national healthcare plan. I designed one. And when you turn 58, you no longer need outside insurance. So imagine if I'm your employer and you turn 58, I don't have to pay insurance for you anymore. You're covered by the national plan.
Yeah, that's how it should definitely.
So
the costs are be part
lower.
Of it.
They're lower because the national plan takes care of it. I don't know. It had a lot of people were like stunned, like, how'd you think of all this? And I said, people telling me what was a good idea and what wasn't. Help me hone this into a great idea, a series of great ideas.
Yeah, well, more leaders need to be like that. All right, let's
need to be a leader.
Let's get through. Let's get into some John Lennox.
Gentlemen, I believe in God. I believe in the supernatural God who created the heavens and the earth. I believe in a God who holds the heavens and the earth in existence. I believe that on the basis of rational evidence, similar to the beliefs held by the founders of this house, who gave this university the motto, Dominus Illuminatio Mea. They saw no contradiction between faith in God and the utmost excellence in rational inquiry.
Wow, that already is a bad start. First, John Lennox explains what he believes, and then he continues to say that his beliefs are based upon rational evidence. But then, the first thing he does is using an argument from authority, which is a pretty low-bar logical fallacy. He tells us that the founders of the University of Oxford would agree with him that a God exists. So what? If Lennox is the profound thinker that his fans claim he is, then he should know that it is completely irrelevant what the founders of the University of Oxford thought about the existence of a God. Whatever they thought is irrelevant to the actual existence of a God, and can in no way be seen as rational evidence for anything, especially not since the founders of the University of Oxford lived more than 900 years ago, centuries before modern science was established in the Western world. So, no, that was not a very good start. It was a waste of 30 seconds of everybody's time. But let's continue and see if John Lennox will present some actual rational evidence for the existence of a God. Let's see if he will keep his promise.
All right, so there's two other things that I always want to bring up when I hear these type of arguments. One is Christians, you need to make up your minds. Your stuff is anti-science and anti-academic and flies in the face of research in most reasonable fields, not just evolution, just all the sciences and the social sciences. And they know this, and it's why they're mostly against public education. It's why you hear this anti-CRT, stop the woke agenda. But then at the same time, they want to turn around and take credibility for academic institutions. So they always want to both. They always want to say, don't listen to the scientific consensus conspiracy nonsense. At the same time, the church is really responsible for the foundation of the scientific university. what is the university the problem or the shining achievement of the church? I'm confused. And the second thing is, no, they would not agree with you. Let's be clear, because they're making what I'm about to make up a fallacy, y'all. It's the argumentum historico. Okay, that's just to pretend that's a thing. And what it is the fallacy that somebody's thoughts in the past represent what they would think currently.
Right.
If you know, like nowadays, like for instance, most people believe in evolution, for instance. So if you took most of the people who believed in creationism historically throughout the past and they live now, yeah, they believe in evolution like most people do. And this really gets to Christians because their stuff is, well, they believed it 2,000 years ago, so it must be true. You know, the great white men of history who established our great institutions were all Christians, so it must be real. Nah, that's just not how it works. Go ahead.
No, I want to say, like, the Bible, that's an argument from authority in a way.
Absolutely.
Again and again, because it's considered that. I think you make another excellent point by thinking or by stating that if the people from back then were alive today, that they would hold the same opinions. I know for me, I've said it on the Hot Program, that wouldn't be true for me. When I look back at what I would see in Plato's Phaedo, and where Socrates is talking about the underworld and how there's this lake of fire that you're in, and you're calling out for forgiveness to the people you hurt in life. And it's when they forgave you that you could be brought out of the lake of fire. That's beautiful, because I know in my own life, when I have forgiven someone, I often feel better too. It's not just that they feel better and, you know, our friendship, relationship, whatever, can move on. It's a mutual thing, which makes it all the more important. I resonate with that. That's a good value of mine today. So imagine, cast your mind back to 3,000 years ago, and it's a pretty good, believable idea. You know, if I had seen lava coming out of a volcano and not understood that the earth had a molten core and, you know, different layers like crust, mantle, all those things. If I didn't understand that, and I just thought, yeah, that's the gods at work, and they devised this wonderful or terrible system for punishing / rewarding people, and I was subject to it because everybody was, and I'd never seen a rocket go into space, an airplane, you know, never ridden in a modern boat, all these things. If I didn't have the understanding that I've been gifted by scientists working their tails off, yeah, I could fall into that belief. But if we could show Jesus one of those procedures that Ronnie Coleman went through, right?
You're right.
And Jesus, well, yeah, I see why this is better. Like, yeah, because now let's go to a church, Jesus. Would you rather have me fix this guy or him go to one of your local churches and have them lay hands on him? Jesus is probably gonna, if he existed, say, yeah, you're wasting your freaking time taking him to a church these days. There's none of that healing going on.
That's a fantastic point. And also just had me thinking of it's not even true over an individual's lifetime, right? Where so often a person changes their mind just over you know, the course of their maturation as an adult. But certainly throughout the eons of history. So yeah, this is always a terribly bad argument, and it always just sounds like they just want to throw out some fancy names, but it's nobody cares.
If I dare mention my alma mater of Cambridge in this holy place, I would remind you that on the door of the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge are written the words, "Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them."
So, another argument from authority. That's
Really,
number 2
just-
now. It's totally
he's not
irrelevant what is written on the doors of the University of Cambridge. Mr. Lennox, you are a mathematician. You surely understand that this does not prove anything, and it kind of degrades your plea as a whole. By starting off with 2 arguments from authority, you're now 2 points down in this match.
I would argue that also written on the doors of Cambridge are ladies and gentlemen, but those are bathrooms.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's a weird argument. And I also think that they're also it's 2 things. Like, it's the arguments that are fallacious, but I also think they're eating clock, trying to endear himself to the audience and sort of create an emotional impression rather than, jumping straight into whatever ultimately is going to be used to make his case.
Well, so what's being built with this argument of authority is you're creating a structure. The Bible does this well. There's a structure there, and within that structure are all the rules, and nothing can exist outside of the firmament, right? Nothing can exist outside of the structure. So because of that, when they make their arguments, it's from the locus is inside that structure. And us as outsiders who don't believe in that structure, we can never make a good argument to them because it doesn't fit their framework. And so if you are a Christian sitting in the audience and you're not trying to, I say, think broadly. I don't want to say they're not thinking, they are. You're not trying to think broadly, but if you're adhering to that structure, then you're failing to truly embrace the outside argument because it comes from the outside, So I think if you are a believer and you are a witness or party to this sort of thing, keep that in mind. Are you really actually engaging in the arguments, or are you just saying you're staying in that half bubble, right? That dome where you don't want anything to come in from the outside. So, just got to watch it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the others commented that men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver.
So I'm kind of astonished now. One of the supposedly greatest Christian minds in the world, Mr. John Lennox, is promising us rational evidence for the existence of a God, and he starts off by using 3 arguments from authority in a row. Wow, that is disappointing.
Yes, it is.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not ashamed of being both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably Christianity gave me my subject.
But you not being ashamed for believing in the existence of a God, again, proves nothing about the existence of a God. I'm now getting a bit impatient. Please present us the rational evidence for the existence of your God, as you promised us.
What I am amazed at is that serious thinkers today continue to ask us to choose between God and science.
No, I'm not asking you to choose between God and science. I'm asking you to present your rational evidence for the existence of your God, as you promised us.
When Newton discovered his law of gravity, he didn't say, I've got a law, I don't need God. No, he wrote the Principia Mathematica, arguably the greatest work in the whole history of science.
Oh, my goodness.
Because he saw that God is not the same kind of explanation as a scientific explanation. God doesn't compete.
This is a sermon. This is just this is a sermon.
In the bubble.
And he should be, in the bubble. And he should be ashamed of himself, because you cannot think this stuff for scientific reasons. So to present this whole case of their compatibility, I'm one of those people who I don't like that. I always tell a person, can you be a scientist and a Christian? Sure, you can be a lot of things, but can you be a Christian for scientific reasons? No.
Well,
they're very different propositions.
I went to that church where I was in the parking ministry, that non-denominational church. I found it interesting that one day someone asked the minister, how do I do this? How do I implement what you're telling me? This sounds great. I would love to be on the other side of the process. What is the process? It turns out that was a course you could pay like $400 to $600 for and learn.
Wow.
Where I'm assuming it was what he already said. I don't know. I didn't take the course, but I think that person is absolutely right. If right to ask, if we take that same set of questions and you go to any church in the United States of America or anywhere in the world and say, okay, in the Mark says, and I'm always harping on this one, it's the easiest one that debunks Christianity. So how do I get the power to lay hands on people and heal them? I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. I adhere to the following principles that he set forth and these other principles from the Torah. So tell me, what must I do to have healing powers so I can heal the sick people? Because I want to make that my mission in life as I spread the gospel. You won't even hear the crickets.
Wow.
There's no course they can sell you. There's nothing they can teach you. They can send you to medical school, right? At their expense, and you can learn and become a very competent physician. But you're not walking up to people like the lady did to me in the Panda Express parking lot, laying hands on my ankle to heal me and then telling me she couldn't heal me because I didn't have enough faith. So it's my fault. It's my fault. Fabulous. All right. So that's the problem that's here. For a lot of Christians, in my opinion, I think you got, well, religions in general, I think to some degree it's an empty cup because philosophically, your ideas may change and help you grow as a person and help you live a better life. That is a win all day long. But things like heaven, that's an empty promise. Things like hell, thankfully, that's an empty promise. And so a lot of people don't fully live, even fully give, because they think that's coming. They're people, we see them, right? They don't take care of the planet because they say, well, the end times are near. They've been saying that. Jesus himself said that. And everybody Jesus ever spoke to, if he was real, is dead.
Right. It's a way for them to not think about it, to not have to
It's checking out.
Checking
It's
out.
checking
Absolutely.
out. Absolutely. Without having to admit it.
Yeah. And I was just gonna say too, like, I think that tension that a person feels is very real. I actually don't believe science and religion are compatible. I think people have religious identities as a matter of history. And we're in basically a period where the sort of the world in which we have enough to render religion obsolete is relatively recent, right? And so there's a transition, but the transition may not be inevitable, right? That's how history works, right? You don't really know which path we're going to go, but I don't think what I was really thinking is, like, I don't think that if these stories happen today, that they would spread the same way. Matter of fact, I think there probably are plenty examples of similar stories. It's just in a modern worldview, people don't think that way. So modern myths don't tend not to take off like previous ones. Not to say that there won't always be cults or people who believe weird things, but I genuinely just think that people are trying to reconcile two very different ways of viewing the world, and they use one in their everyday life, and they sort of realize as a matter of course that they should be able to account for their religious ideas within that same framework of rationality and evidence and all of that stuff, but they can't. And so I think that's I can relate to that feeling, right? I think that sends a lot of us down the intellectual path that for many leads to atheism. But yeah, I think it's a reasonable thing. And yeah, I don't think we'd have to deal with Christianity the way we have to if it started today. I don't think it would ever taken off to the
No,
extent
I
that
don't
it
think
did.
so either. Let me try to keep it, this argument going and couch it in modern times. So on my YouTube feed earlier, there was this video that was talking about black holes and what the James Webb Telescope saw and how it's amazing and all that stuff. I'm gonna reduce Christianity to this, okay? They showed in this video the actual image captured by the James Webb Telescope. It was some pixels, right? On my screen, it's like a 55-inch TV or whatever. Just some pixels, didn't look like much. It looked like maybe it was part of a screenshot from Super Mario Brothers or Mario Brothers from the original Nintendo, which I had, right? 6-bit, 8-bit, I don't know what it was. I guess it's 8-bit, 16-bit. I don't know.
Yeah, 8
but
probably.
something that isn't like you see in a video game today, where the graphics are at times they look completely real. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. It was just some dots. Then they showed another image next to it. Then they showed the animation of what a very talented visual effects artist created to sort of describe it. And I thought, I don't believe any of this. It's not that it's not true, right? The concept of what they're telling me could be true, but what they're showing me isn't true. What they're showing me is maybe a few people collaborated to come up with this idea of what it actually looks like. Well, the James Webb Telescope, as miraculous as it may be, shows me a few pixels. I can bank on that, right? They can say, based on these pixels, it's roughly this size. It's ultra massive, I think was the term that they were using, or maybe even bigger than that. So, okay, I get it. There's a force out there like this. This is a phenomenon that occurs in nature. But thank you, 8-bit NES. There's only so much that I'm going to believe about it because I can't observe it. So Christianity gets the same. When I look at Jesus, I can't help but to look at him in light of other individuals who were said to have the same abilities and a similar history. He's not special because he's in the Bible. To me, he's just another guy that seems very mythological, like Apollo, like Samson, like Hera, like Ra, and we can go on and on and on, right? He's another one of those mythological types.
Right.
And even if he was a real guy, the Bible gives us pixels. It also shows us the artist's conception of what he must have been like. The stained glass windows in your church, it's artist's conception of what he must have looked like. The ministers preaching the sermons, it's artist's conceptions of what he must have been like. Because the Bible never gives you the whole thing. When we can look up at the moon and get a lot of details. If you wear glasses that correct your vision, that's fine. If you don't, you're going to get as much detail as I do. If we get a telescope and it's made to look at something like the moon, you're going to pick up a heck of a lot more details that you just didn't see with your bare eyes, colors and things like that. You'll start to see those that you can't make out from here. But you're essentially pulled in closer, in a manner of speaking, to what you are observing. We can't do that very well with the Bible. When we have outside historical sources that may confirm an event that also is in the Bible, like, okay, there's a particular well. Well, fantastic. That doesn't mean that the reason that striped goats are born is because they were bred in front of striped sticks, right? We can't conclude that from that. Just because there's the well of Siloam is there. The pool of Siloam. it doesn't prove these other things. It doesn't prove that Jesus
Doesn't prove the
walked on
story,
water.
right?
It doesn't
right.
prove Noah's Ark, right? Just because that's there, but they're pixels. They're pixels. What happens then as this idea of this type of black hole is described again and again by people who saw the whole thing and paid way more attention to it than I did because they weren't half asleep. Those people are creating in the minds of the people they tell. PBS had a great commercial that was like this. You know, one person has told an idea. You see all these little lights come out of them. Another person's told the same idea. And now all these people are going to spread this idea. But what we know about human nature is the details change somewhat. The story grows in the telling, as Dr. Price often said, as a lot of people probably said. So we don't truly know. And maybe someday in 10,000 years, human beings will go look at that thing that was just a few pixels and be able to give us a proper perspective on, look, we could only get so close without getting sucked in and dying. So here are the images we were able to take with our super advanced cameras that we were able to place in different sectors around this thing. And here's what we came up with. Watch the video. And it's astonishing. And you can feel like you're there.
Yeah, and it feels dim-witted for somebody like Lennox to try to present themselves as a hardcore intellectual, but at the same time act as though they don't recognize the deficiency of you know, trying to put the story on the same par with the evidence that we have. And so it makes you realize that I don't know. Again, it feels like a sermon, right? Because it feels like he's not really communicating in a way that's supposed to convince or impress the academics in the room to the extent that they're there. It feels like it's supposed to, you know, bring comfort to believers and make them think he's performing well in this debate.
Well, if you go back a little in the video, you'll see how bored some of those students look.
Yeah, I'm
like
sure
they're not buying it. They're not buying it. Ken Humphreys probably had the greatest assessment of people like John Lennox. He called them salesmen of Jesus.
Absolutely.
And it's incontrovertible truth. They are salesmen of Jesus, just trying to get you to believe, just trying to get you to pay your money and keep believing.
I did I think watch this debate or similar debates. I actually kind of like once in a while I get the sort of more formal debate style. Like, you know, it's interesting. I've seen a few of those, and you know, I find them sometimes entertaining. But the content wise, I think any of the debates with Christianity versus whatever just gets boring, because again, there's just no honest way to defend something that isn't true. So it's more interesting if they're debating like philosophical points or political policies or you know, matters of history and things like that. Though I think those debates are more interesting to me now than like sort of the religious debates. But this is nevertheless, this is where we are.
Agency does not compete with mechanism and law.
You are drifting away more and more from your initial promise. You're now trying to bend your lecture into some sort of narrative in favor of the idea that people can believe in a God and be a mathematician at the same time. We know that, but that doesn't prove that a God exists. It only proves that people like you exist.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
Why is there something rather than nothing? Ladies and gentlemen, this question is a trick. It's a language trick to lure you into believing something that has not been proven to exist. And I think I've never before heard someone producing a comprehensive debunk of this trick. So if even someone like John Lennox is using this trick, then it's about time someone should expose it. And I guess that will be me. Why is there something rather than nothing is a language trick that is so subtle that most people do not notice it. The trick revolves around a double meaning of the word why. You see, the word why can ask for the mechanism that explains some material event or physical situation, but the word why can also ask for a motivation or an intention that someone had for doing something. For example, when I ask you, why did the apple fall from the tree? You are expecting the kind of answer like, well, the wind was blowing and that put so much force on the stem of the apple that it snapped, and then of course the apple fell to the ground. So the laws of physics are such that these events happen. So when I ask you why the apple fell to the ground, you expect me to explain the physical mechanism that caused the apple to fall. What you don't expect me to say is, well, the apple has been hanging there for months now, and the apple thought it was time for something new, and that's why he decided to detach from the tree and
The
fall
apple
to the
jumped.
ground. We don't expect any kind of motivation or intention from the apple itself, because the apple hasn't got brains, so it can't think for itself. Actually, if the question, why did the apple fall to the ground, was meant to ask for the motivation and intention of the apple, the question wouldn't make any sense, because that question would imply the existence of something that we know doesn't exist. An apple doesn't think, so asking for its motivation to fall from a tree would be a nonsense question. But when I ask you, why did the man throw the apple? It's the other way around, because we know that the man does have brains. There might have been some kind of specific intention or motivation for him to throw that apple. So then we might expect an answer like, he threw that apple so that it would end up in the basket where he was collecting the other apples. What we don't expect is an answer that explains the physical mechanism behind him throwing the apple. So we don't expect the answer to be, well, his muscles responded to his brain activity, so that is why he threw the apple. So in these examples of these two questions, why did the apple fall to the ground and why did the man throw the apple? The word why has two distinct different meanings, and in case of the apple, we immediately understand that difference. But now ask me a much more complicated question. Why is there something rather than nothing? This question very cleverly exploits the ambiguity of the word why. When we hear the question, why is there something rather than nothing, our brain starts to think very rapidly and tries to figure out what the meaning of the word why is in this specific question. Is someone asking us to explain the physical mechanism that explains how the universe got into existence? That would be a question for cosmologists to answer. Or, just like the example with the apple, is this question perhaps implying that there was a motivation or an intent behind the universe coming into existence? And of course, that is exactly what a Christian apologist wants you to believe. If that was the meaning of the question, asking for an intent or a motivation behind the universe coming into existence, then the question is implying the existence of something that has not been proven to be real. There is no evidence to suggest that there is meaning and intent behind the universe coming into existence.
Yeah. All right. So I was going to say also for me, it's just a nonsense question. So I wanted to let him give the explanation of the double meaning of why, because it's actually kind of helpful. Because if you take the mechanistic understanding of the word why, then yeah, go ask a cosmologist. And honestly, it's a stupid question because we haven't observed that it's possible to not have what we have. Matter of fact, it seems necessary. And even if it's not necessary, we haven't observed any alternatives. So, you know, cool, like the choice to play baseball only matters because you can also play football, basketball. Like there's alternatives. We right. Literally have no means to observe an alternative. So do you know what the result of that is? Most of you did not become cosmologists. Like, right? Because you just have to be interested in the very peculiar area of science, usually for reasons of, just that's what a person is fascinated by, or questions they want to answer. But for most of us, it has absolutely zero practical application to our day-to-day lives. And the question as to the purpose, like why, again, it's nonsensical. There is no why. It's like, why, I guess when you get them wrong, you immediately make a nonsense question. So if you're asking for a purpose answer to a physical mechanism, there just isn't one. But the thing that gets me with the Christians is, let's just go ahead and say, like, let's go ahead and play your stupid game. Getting us to there must be a purpose for why there's something rather than nothing. You still, like, as Christopher Hitchens would say, you still have all your work ahead of you, because none of that demonstrates that there's a God, and that God has anything to do with creation, or that if there is a God and it is a creator and it did make the universe, that it's the Christian God, or that if it is a God and it did make the universe and it is the Christian God, that it's the Christian version, not the not the other versions of Yahweh. Like, it just doesn't, and that list just keeps going on and on and on, the things that it does nothing for. So it just ends up being silly. And it sounds silly to me now when people say it. And when John Lennox says it, it doesn't sound any more intellectual than when Frank Turek or William Lane Craig or any of the other apologists who say this. And when lay Christians say this, you just immediately know that they're parroting stupid apologists. So,
well, I think for we non-believers in the Bible, and even those who would challenge it, who may have another faith tradition, you can look at Jesus and figure it out that it's just not true. Others, he said, other people who come after him will do greater things, and supposedly within the framework of his faith practice. So he's teaching this to other people. It's Jesus being one of those guys selling in an infomercial, with our proven system, you too will be able to perform at this level. Like the stock tips or something. You're gonna you follow what this guy does, you're gonna be amazing. Well, past performance is not a projection of future profits, future performance, whatever. The disclaimer is there, right? Jesus gives a disclaimer too, like, you must truly believe, sincere, so the Bible says that again and again. It's just covering its own butt. Once they realize, later writers realize, that this stuff just isn't true, but the money's good, right? Or it makes a better society, or I think we need this in order so that people don't go off the rails. This is really keeping people in alignment. Or we see now more kindness than we did before, and I don't want that to go away. So let me just make a few corrections in here, add some caveats and a few loopholes, so that we get out of being accountable for what the Bible actually says.
Well, that's actually brings up another good point about Christianity, which is, when is it going to make the world better? Again, it's one of those things where they talk out of both sides of their mouth. Like, Christianity is supposed to be the basis for morality. It's the most dominant religion in the Western world, yet they're constantly talking about how wicked the world is and it's dominated by sin. Like, well, apparently y'all are losing this battle, because you've supposedly got the numbers on your side, but why? We should live in this world where the hardest part of getting people in the church is that life is just so good. People are just so kind to each other. They're just so charitable. They're just so loving, that Christians are having to remind people, it's us that's actually doing that. It's the church is the reason, because of God's love. That's the reason you're not starving. And God's love is providing that medicine for you.
I think it was Thomas Merton who said something like, religions ought to be competitions for doing good.
Seriously,
something on that level. It's a competition. We can do more good than you guys can. Oh yeah, well, let's work together and see what happens. That sort of thing. But that's not what we see.
No,
there are people. I don't want to say there aren't people like that. There are. I've met some, and it's been wonderful to be in their presence. And again, if I weren't an underfunded philanthropist, I would gladly contribute These are religious people. I would gladly contribute to their
Yeah.
success, their continued success,
Yes.
so they could have it on a larger scale.
I'll put
buy
it
the
to you
church
like this: give me $1 billion, and I will be far more charitable than the average billionaire. Give me.
Good. Yeah.
Yes, gang. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much, Crystal.
That version of the question, just like with the example of the falling apple, is a nonsense question. That version of the question is very subtly implying that there is a motivation and intent behind the universe coming into existence, and all we need to now is figure out what that motivation and intent are and from whom they originated. The question itself very subtly tries to make you believe that without ever providing any shred of evidence that such a thing could be true. So, whenever someone asks you, why is there something rather than nothing? Then tell them that there is something rather than nothing for the same reason why an apple falls to the ground. The laws of physics are such that events like these happen. Of course, a Christian apologist won't be satisfied with that answer, so then they might want to steer the conversation into the direction of the other version of the why question. So then they might get more specific and ask you, what was the motivation and the intent behind the universe coming into existence? And then, of course, you could continue with the apple example and ask them if they think that the apple had motivation and intent to fall from the tree. And if not, then why would there be a motivation and intent behind the universe coming into existence? They just claim it, and by asking that question, they didn't prove anything. It's just a nonsense question, just like asking what the motivation behind the falling apple is. All right, I think that was a pretty comprehensive debunk of the nonsensical why is there something rather than nothing question. It took a bit of time, but let's go back to John Lennox, who up to now didn't prove anything other than that he doesn't mind using arguments from authority and nonsense questions.
A nonsense question.
Alan Sandage, the brilliant cosmologist who became a Christian in his 50s, said God is the answer to that question.
Shocking. Another argument from authority.
Goodness.
That would be number 4 now. It's totally irrelevant what
Gang,
this
a Christian used God to answer a question. How profound. How profound. That's never happened before. They don't.
Well, pocket locker. I think you would have no trouble locating Christians who would tell you God is always the answer.
Exactly. And they act and they say it sincerely, as though
again, it's within
tragic.
the framework. It's within
the framework,
firmament
yes,
that is above the rest of the world, which clearly, is in the Bible flat, and it's a flat circle like a pizza with.
It's being held up
toppings.
by pillars or something, right?
Yeah.
Awful. And
cosmologist said, and it's irrelevant that he converted to Christianity. It simply proves nothing about the existence of a God. Will you finally start presenting your rational evidence for the existence of a God?
But people are now so desperate to show that the universe created itself from nothing, which seems to me to be an immediate oxymoron.
Who is desperate? How did you establish that? And how is that relevant to anything? And how does it prove the existence of your God? And why do you totally misrepresent the Big Bang Theory? Because that is what you're doing here. Nobody believes that everything came from nothing. Nobody claims that. There's only Christian apologists, like yourself, pretending that there are people who claim this. So after presenting his 4 arguments from authority, you're now switching to straw man arguments. You make up positions that people never took, and then you attack those positions that nobody ever took, which proves nothing apart from.
Also, what would happen if you said love? Why is there something? Why nothing? Where does it all come from? Just say love, and they look at you like, what? And you're like, well, that's God is love, right? And it all comes from God. And God is, because that's what they technically believe. But how stupid does that sound? Yeah, love. Love.
Well,
where does the universe come from? Love comes from love.
I got some flights coming up in my schedule, so if I get proselytized too, maybe I'll try that out.
Yeah.
So if now wait, you said that the Bible says God is love. So love created brain cancer. Love created all sorts of other monstrous things, right?
Tsunamis.
Well,
yeah.
What are they going to say? What are they going to say? Love created the universe, which is a lovely thing to do. But one day the Earth is probably going to be hit by some asteroid floating out there right now, right? And it'll be catastrophic.
Absolutely.
It'll kill most of the life on the planet.
Right.
Is that love at work?
Yeah, how far do y'all really want to take this? It's sad. Also, I appreciate, and at the same time I'm disappointed by this exercise, because John Lennox's presentation so far is just the same old stuff.
Yes.
And it just gets to that disappointment, like, y'all really, really don't have anything better to put up. You don't really have intellectual giant of Christianity. I would say this is another one, just as most atheists have read the Bible more than most believers. I would say most of us have probably gone out of our way looking for good Christian arguments that Christians have. It's just so disappointing that they never get beyond this childishness.
Well, one of the best arguments, in my view, that Christians do make is when they ask me, like, well, how did the universe get here? I don't have an answer for that because I'm not a cosmologist.
Right, right.
I'm not an astrophysicist. I haven't studied those things with any depth at all. So I don't have an answer for them. Instead of lying, I admit it. Instead of
Right.
telling them someone else's story, I admit it. And they say, well, I think God did it. And from my perspective, when they do that, they immediately inherit everything wrong with the setup
Yeah.
that they now have to deal with.
Yeah.
So again, as I mentioned, the asteroid that's going to hit the Earth and kill off most of the life here, or the early, like a proto moon colliding with the Earth in one theory, and then making the moon as it is today and helping to make the Earth as it is today. You know, things like that. They now have to go through the Bible and scrape off all that stuff into an argument that's supposed to help them compete with me saying, I don't know, I don't have a belief for that.
Yeah.
Right? Their job is made harder because they do. I don't have to disprove them wrong. I now have questions about, well, if that's true, then your God's not very competent. You do realize that. I mean, they would have to confront that. Like, yeah, I do realize it's a bit of a mess,
Right.
punctuated by long periods of beauty and struggle. And then here comes another mess to screw that up.
And I still have the same questions as why and how. You know, when they go to, well, you know, where did it all come from? God. Okay, well, why? Like, you know, in other words, it's just supposed to answer a question, but then we can assume God's motivation. Like, it still doesn't make any sense to me, even if there is a God. Like, why? Like, why would he do things like this?
Well, you know,
Um
you've made me think of something. Go ahead and finish. I'm sorry, I
the
interrupted you.
other
Go
thing I was
ahead.
just gonna say is how, right? They still have to
Mhm.
explain, and then when you really get down mechanistically, of course, the evidence we have would suggest that God's God's method of God duties, however, his method of execution is
Mhm.
the same as the method of execution if he didn't exist, and that's a pretty interesting way to do things.
So, one of the posts I saw on Facebook earlier today was about human beings doing things to glorify God. So, if this is why God created human beings, and they're also angels, and if angels are in heaven praising God, why make people? He's already got a system up there going on where these creatures, these angels, praise him day and night, you know, and probably make him feel really good about himself. I guess, I don't know. In a way, I see the God of the Bible a lot like Trump, constantly saying how he's better than everybody else, giving himself lots of praise and trying to convince others to do so, meanwhile, ignoring all the terrible things that clearly are faults and convincing other people to do the same. You know, so the two to me are very laughably
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
similar.
No, I think it's a good point. And to be honest, I think the entire Trump thing capitalizes on that. I think the reason he's so popular with religious people is because he's taking advantage of the same credulity.
He's
And
borrowing their program.
they're committed to that credulity
It's your
because
playbook.
they couldn't have their faith without it. And so ironically, he has been able to, become their candidate, even though he's clearly not a sincere believer. And I just saw something actually was so
He's not
interesting, is that
sincere.
they've convinced themselves, even now, like they've convinced themselves that he's the most religious of the candidates that they have. And that's insane to me. But look, they believe he can win, or he's the most recent winner that they've had, and they need to believe. So they already have to believe in the face of the apparent contradiction to the evidence. They already have to yeah, so I don't know. It's scary that I think there's a much stronger connection there than we're willing to speak about. Yeah, when they call it the cult of Trump, it's literally no exaggeration.
Questionable
Yeah, exactly.
debating tricks. This truly makes me sad. This man is supposedly one of the greatest Christian thinkers of our time. And what does he do? He presents the same stupid logical fallacies that have been debunked a million times before.
Smashing the
If I say X
patriarchy. We're
created
about
Y,
that
I'm
life.
assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. If I say X created X, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of X, which simply shows that nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists utter it.
But, Mr. Lennox, that situation only exists in your fantasy. Nobody claims that X created X. Why don't you give us real-life examples of scientists who claim that X created X? You don't do that because those examples
that
don't
God
exist.
created God, right?
Yes.
God is self-created.
Yes.
X created X.
Yes, and did it ex nihilo, just spoke it into existence from absolutely nothing. And then and then they also get the eternity of God, right? They also get to say, there's nothing that doesn't come from something. Everything's contingent upon something else. Okay, so then where does God come from? What was around before God was around? Where? Oh no, sorry, that's different. No, God's different.
Yeah, there's
God
this
always,
one exception.
yeah,
As
there's just
William
this one
Lane Craig
exception
would
every
say, it's like a
rule.
properly basic belief. You know,
Yeah.
does I don't? You have a dog. Does your dog believe in God?
Nope.
Are there any signs of anyone with a pet? I don't have pets.
Well, this is my whole thing. This is why I'm a strong atheist. And I don't mean strong physically. I mean strong as in I am of the I'm not just someone who doesn't believe in God. I'm of the opinion that there are no gods. And that's my case. Is everything else that we say exists independently of human beings. If there were no human beings, there would still be trees. If there were no human beings, there would still be dogs. If there was no human beings, there would still be whatever. Pretty much everything would still exist that's natural, except for what? Things that were creation of human beings and whatever they make. And would there still be gods if there were no people? No. I think gods are firmly in the category of products of the human imagination. It's just a great irony that there's absolutely no evidence that gods created man, but there's all the evidence suggests that men in particular create gods.
Yes.
Which is just another commentary on the patriarchy.
Well, we have Aunt Jer sharing with us. My cat believes that he's God. Does that count? I suppose it would have to.
Yeah.
I suppose that's good enough.
which makes this part of your plea another straw man argument. So that is your second straw man argument.
It reminds me a little bit of G.K. Chesterton, who said, "It is absurd to complain that it is unthinkable for an unthinkable God to make everything out of nothing, and then to pretend that it is more thinkable that nothing should turn itself into everything."
What an utter disappointment. Nobody ever claimed that nothing created everything. It's one of the most pathetic strawman arguments in the book, and it is a true deception that someone with your reputation is degrading his own legacy by applying such charlatanist reasoning. You're now at 4 arguments from authority and 3 strawman arguments. This is bad news.
It's not going well.
The heavens declare the glory of God, says the ancient psalm.
What? So you're now even giving us a Bible quote, which of course proves nothing other than that Bible quotes exist? Up to now, your arguments cannot be distinguished from the most silly arguments of the thousands of budget apologist fools who populate YouTube. What's next, Mr. Lennox? A flat earth?
And we've unraveled a bit of that, seeing the fine-tuning of the fundamental forces of nature.
Oh, the
It's something that's so
fine-tuning
striking to
argument.
scientists that it
Oh,
demands
my goodness.
explanation.
Oh,
like
yeah,
a-
sure. The fine-tuning argument. I should have known.
He's like a gumball machine of apologists, of apologetics. You put your money in, you crank the thing, and you just don't know which bad argument is going to come out.
I'm gonna go get something out of the bar. I have a bar in my house. I'm gonna go get something. Keep going.
All right.
It's relevant to what's
Okay.
happening in here. So I'll still be able to hear you. I just won't be able to see you.
All right.
Usual Christian apologist BS from the shelves now. The only fine-tuning in that argument is the careful way that Christian apologists label this argument. Fine-tuning, that implies a thinking agent who deliberately is tuning and tweaking the universe, and that was the whole thing the argument should prove in the first place. But by calling your argument the fine-tuning argument, you don't prove that fine-tuning exists. You only pretend it. Oh boy.
And it's
Also, gang, I'm here to tell you, the universe is not fine-tuned. Like, it just isn't. There's literally zero evidence that there would be a being capable of tuning the universe. Also, there's doubt as to whether this whole thing about, so yes, there are a bunch of cosmological constants, but we don't really know that changing them would change very much. Also, just think about, so it's just so weird. And then what would the universe be fine-tuned for? Like they always say that it's fine-tuned for our existence or life or whatever, but actually most of the universe is completely uninhabitable and filled with nothingness. So the universe was fine-tuned for nothing. If it was fine-tuned for life, we would expect life to be ubiquitous throughout the universe. It'd be all over the place. It'd be like, oh my goodness, you can't, every corner of the universe you look in, every corner of the earth, you just see life everywhere because it's just, it's fine-tuned for it. Again, it's just silly.
Maybe it's fine-tuned for generating curiosity. This is a partial set of play plaques. So here's the box. This toy is probably older than you, Pocket Locker.
Yeah,
almost as old as me.
What's it called? Play
plaques. So
okay, camera's backwards, but yeah, got it.
If your kid shows an interest in engineering, you can get them an erector set and play plaques. Things fit together, and you could build things. Just start to make, you can make a castle, a fort, whatever, with these play plaques. Now, with why I brought this out, this is what we're seeing when we listen to apologists. They've been given a set like this, and it's all that's out there for them to draw from. Carrie Ann says she remembers that. There's another company that makes something similar. It is not called Playplex. I have one of those too. So within the Bible, it's their study source material, if you will. Not the world, the Bible. They now have to take what they read in there and reconcile it with the world in order to make the world make sense, right? And the authors, in fairness to the authors who constructed the Bible, they had the same task because they had so much scripture that came before what they wrote, beyond what the first people wrote. They had to deal with how they saw the world and what they had as scripture to write the next set of things. So the arguments that apologists use are the set of play plaques. If someone comes along and builds something that is really intricate and beautiful and functions, they'll grab onto it because this solves some of the old problems. The way this idea is constructed, it solves that for us. So even without fully understanding it, let's use that when we talk to atheists. Let's use that to put them in their place. When we debate people who practice Islam and think Islam is like the greatest things ever, that it is the absolute truth, and it can refute other things. Well, when we debate those people, let's use these arguments. So they get used again and again. And this set's pretty old. A child can play with this thousands of times, and as long as they don't smash the pieces, it'll be around for many generations. Perhaps fitting looser and looser, or more loose and more loose as time goes by.
Probably why PlayPlax isn't around anymore, because they made one of them good toys that last forever, and you didn't need to buy a new one. So you need to buy a new one.
Erector sets are like that. There was that game, I think it was called Mousetrap, where the little ball, the steel ball, would roll around and go up and down, and it had a little elevator and all that stuff. You can build different styles. I had Matchbox cars, I had Tyco raceways, and you could configure it in all sorts of crazy ways, and it was a lot of fun to do so. And no doubt, without seeing what other people had done, my little brother and I, when we would build those racetracks, were making things other kids were making in other parts of the world. Right. We had the same set. Could you configure it in an infinite amount of ways? I doubt it, because at that time, it was basically flat and some corners. And if you had the pieces that came in the box, maybe there's 50, 60 ways to put it together, if you use all the pieces. So that's what we're seeing when we watch Christian apologists. We can watch one after another use the same argument with the same failings in the same way. And now and again, somebody thinks of a new twist on that idea that renews it and makes it seem like it's better than it is. And what you're going to do is you'll raise the eyebrows of apologists and people who depend, right? They depend on those apologetic arguments to bolster their faith. Hey, if people came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? There had to be people high-fiving each other when the first apologists said that. Oh, dude, yeah, that's why are there still monkeys? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's what's happening in the Bible too, that the evolution of the stories you see are largely in part to answer challenges that they were coming up with. And when something worked, that's why it was more likely to end up in the canon than not. It's also interesting that we now see apologetics of the other faiths, be them other Christian traditions, but also Muslim and Jewish and all these other apologetics, and they all use the same stuff. So it's interesting too that they're going to that same set, what works, and they don't realize, well, it doesn't work any better to build a Christian castle than it does to build the Islamic castle. And so but yeah, that's not they haven't got to that part yet. It also just shows you that they're ignoring what's going on with the other faiths. So,
well, they can.
Yeah,
they can. Yeah. It's not their worldview, and their arguments, again, within that framework, under the dome, their arguments are all you need. Their arguments explains the universe in its entirety from their perspective.
Yeah. And it's weird too that we don't see guys like John Lennox right now, like what he's doing. Like he's just trying to stir up the cult and be a cult leader. It's very weird.
I want to read something Carrie Ann has written here. Since all things in existence have opposing variations, two sides of a coin, but all a coin. Chaos is just not being in control of perfection. Perfection is not possible in reality.
Mm.
I would say, Carrie Ann, when you study those the Buddhists, you're faced with a hard argument when they say everything is in a state of perfection. The flaws are part of the lessons to be learned from what has occurred.
I think
what
they're
is
just.
occurring.
I think they're just word game. That's just.
But a lot of it is. But in a way, like when I was studying that stuff and interacting with them, I thought that's really good.
Well, yeah, it might be
That
useful, right? It helps you cope.
It's useful, and it's
Yeah.
if you're trying to talk to someone who's going through a rough patch, that's been happening to me lately. It is probably the easiest path to surrender. It really is. They're telling you right now, we know you're having some difficulties accepting things as they are. And you'll hear Christians say this. I bet you hear Muslims say it. I don't care what the faith is, but you are exactly where you need to be. And some will say you are exactly where Allah wants you to be. You're exactly where Jesus wants you to be.
Yeah,
You're
it's
exactly
acceptance.
where Shiva
Yeah.
wants you to be. And so on. I mean, you could just keep changing the names. Where you're exactly where Antelope and Jaguar want you to be.
Right.
Because they're my favorites. Because you're here to learn. You're in this life to learn. And you're going through this rough patches so that you can rise above it, right? The answer is not only within you, it is you, and you will rise above it. And once you have risen above it, you can look down and see where others are. You can reach down and start lifting them up when they need you to do it. And then they make you feel all empowered, even special, and okay.
Yeah. And
It's still the same. Everything's still the same.
And part of my perspective is doesn't offer those sort of comforts. And I think that's why we need to have a broader scientific revolution so that we can begin to cope with those things that we've always turned to myths for, because false comfort does me no good. So I feel like that's a price that we're paying. And people, you often hear that, like, oh, it's religion. I need my religion because it helps me deal with my mortality, sort of thing. And I'm like, well, how about learning how to deal with your mortality? Like, you know what I mean? Like that would be the real thing to do here. So, but it's hard because it's a social skill. And so you need to be in an environment where that's valued, or else, that's not going to be on the agenda as far as what you're taught.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, hit it right. He is the Nobel Prize winner who discovered the microwave background on which a lot of the evidence for the Big Bang is based. He said astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan.
Wait, another argument from authority. That's number 5. So, a guy who won a Nobel Prize says there must be some supernatural plan. Are you sure you're a scientist? Because a real scientist would understand that none of what you've said so far proves anything about the existence of a god. Okay, so I'm going to give you one final chance to present your rational evidence for the existence of your god, as you promised. I'm running out of patience here.
But I want to come to what I think is one of the fundamental arguments for theism.
Okay, cool. So we're now getting to your most important argument, finally. Give it your best shot.
How is it that a mathematician thinking in her head in here can come up with equations that seem to fit the universe out there? Well, how is it indeed?
Because she's good at math.
The irony of the atheist position here is evident. My atheist friends, and I have many of them, tell me that the driving force of evolution, which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties, reason included, was not primarily concerned with truth at all, but with survival. And we all know,
Oh,
ladies and
my
gentlemen,
goodness.
what has often happened and still happens to truth when individuals or commercial enterprises or nations feel themselves threatened and struggle for survival.
Sweet mother of Gandalf, what a disappointment. You now even start misrepresenting atheism. Atheism has got nothing to do with
I
evolution.
wonder if that kid's
You know
still falling asleep.
So why do you act as if you
Is
don't
the
think
cameraman
all
pan back?
Oh, that was
So what we're seeing here, folks, is Lennox has other people's arguments and not. He doesn't seem to have one of his own. He's a smart enough man, and I don't say this to be funny. He may even be like at a genius level of smart, but this is what he's selling to everyone who will listen. And he's not being very, I'd say he's choosing his quotes wisely, but he's not making any progress with anybody who's listening. I don't think.
no.
I think when the average Christian who attended this debate or who watches this debate will leave it in the same place that they arrived in it at. They will be no more sure, they will be no less sure based on what Lennox says. It's it's the treadmill of faith. A presentation like this, I'm going to get a lot of movement, but I'm going to end up right where I started.
Yeah, and it's also kind of a misrepresentation. Yeah, you could argue that the mind was, most concerned with survival. You could even argue that survival was useless unless the mind also prioritized reproducing, and so really, you needed to survive to the extent that you could reproduce, and that's really what our minds were selected for. But solving problems is always part of that. And understanding what a cue is or what's going on in the environment around you is essential to survival, and it's essential to being able to survive long enough to reproduce. And so to say that there's an evolutionary framework, but that wasn't really concerned with the truth, like that's just BS. I mean, there's always the classic example that you hear rustling in the trees. Is it just the wind or is it a cheetah? If you assume it's just the wind and it's a cheetah, you're in a lot of trouble. Whereas if you assume it's a cheetah and it's just the wind, like you're probably okay. Nevertheless, the fact of the matter is, you hear the rustling in the trees, and you are in fact concerned with whether or not it's a cheetah or something else, and you need to be. So this is just stupid. It's just and again, it's you should be ashamed to call yourself a scientist or an academic and then represent this way with such a patently silly take on all this. And it's supposed to be some kind of gotcha. Like oh yeah, you're right. Our brains, they didn't even evolve for the truth anyway. So there's a God? Like I don't know. It just seems really silly. Really silly. Silly little squirrel. All right, let's
Atheism
wrap this up.
is not believing that a God exists, and it doesn't even stop there because you also misrepresent the process of evolution. Evolution is not concerned with survival. Evolution is not concerned with anything. Evolution is just a natural process. It has no goals. It is not aiming for anything. So, however you try to frame evolution here as some immoral struggle for survival, it really only shows your dishonesty. Mr. Lennox, I'm truly astonished. You have displayed such a nonsensical charade of non-arguments that I can take this gibberish no longer. I'm deeply disappointed by your performance, and therefore I'm going to treat you the exact same way I treat all the other failing Christian apologists that I encounter. I'm now 5 minutes into your 15-minute lecture, and this is where I'm going to stop. You promised us rational arguments for the existence of your God, but in the first 5 minutes of your lecture, all you gave us were 5 arguments from authority and 4 strawman arguments. And then, as the icing on the cake, you misrepresented atheism and you misrepresented evolution. I think it's really disappointing that you use the University of Oxford as your platform for such a low-bar debating trickery. Perhaps I will continue to listen to the rest of your lecture some other time in the future, but for now, I need some time to recover from this disappointment. Will I ever encounter one honest Christian apologist who makes a true, credible case for the existence of their God, using actual, rational arguments and verifiable evidence that truly proves the existence of their God? I'm very doubtful that that is ever going to happen. If even a man like John Lennox is not capable of doing such a thing, then what else is left? But while I'm trying to recover from this silly charade, perhaps you should just subscribe to my channel, because then you will help me to make more videos in which I will expose silly apologists, charlatans. And unfortunately, as I discovered today, even John Lennox seems to be one of them. Thanks.
There's no end to the charlatans. They're just the salesmen. They're everywhere. You know, apparently they're making good money. But yeah, it's really disappointing.
Yeah.
And at some point, I think it just becomes time. I feel like this is the altar call. It just becomes time to figure out a way to try to get Christians to understand that this is no good. This is not an honest worldview. This is not an honest way of life. This is not and it's not humane, right? So it can
be very inhumane.
It's really sad. And I know that some of them are very dependent on them, but to me, the ones who are dependent on them, they're the ones who have been the most coerced. They're the biggest victims. They're the ones who are sacrificing and paying usually the most cost, their time, their money, their energies. And I think it's why they end up being very self-absorbed. They're wrapped up in their sin, they're wrapped up in their church, and by the time they're done given all that is asked from them there, they have very little left for the rest of us. Not enough spoons.
Well, I guess as I've said before, religions are transformational for some people in the sense that if they've been hooked on drugs or alcohol or had some other, very awful behavior that caused them to be abusive. If Christianity or whatever faith comes along and corrects that, I think that's a win for the rest of us.
Sure.
It has to at least be a partial win for society and revolutionary for that individual. And so from that standpoint, I'll always have a healthy respect for religions, for the lives of people like that. Right.
Yeah, I just think I think it's a step though, right? Because I kind of have an external perspective on this, meaning I don't think it's a person's choice really. Even like what you believe, it's sort of down to what you're convinced of. And I think in other words, it's not really our fault that we're not believers in Christianity. We were people who gave it a good shot or were genuine believers, but we had questions, we had curiosities, we pursued those things. There is really logic. There is really reason. Christianity is based on circular arguments. That's true. Christianity contradicts science. That's true. So it's not up to us really whether or not the claims of Christianity are credible. They just don't happen to be in the world in which we find ourselves. So to me, that means a person who bases their transformation on Christianity is still very vulnerable. And I'd be happy. I'm happy that they're getting by, whatever that means, no longer criming, dealing with addiction, no longer being abusive, whatever it is. But I want it to be a stepping stone so that ultimately they can base their transformation on something real, something true, something firm, rather than risk that they'll eventually figure out that this Christianity is nonsense, and then they could be left desperate because now their transformation was based on something that isn't real. But
Mhm.
that's sort of, I would just consider that progress, like how we would hope people would progress ideally. But we definitely still hope that they take that first step, right?
Yeah.
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 So yeah, do you want to give us your closing thoughts about what'd you think of John Lennox?
Well, I obviously I'm not impressed with this presentation that he's offered here. I don't know that someone who's been an apologist for as long as he has and has a career in advanced mathematics like he does. I don't know if he's still sincere,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Is he still doing it because he thinks it makes the world a better place or the money? I don't think he needs the money. I think it's because he thinks, okay, it could be that it gives him purpose. I mean, he could define that better than I ever could. But I don't think it comes from a place where it's purely sincere and that it's still a pure heart held belief. I think, just like I think with William Lane Craig, I think they're slipping away from it, right? And there just isn't the courage to say, you know what, folks, this really isn't my arguments for the validity of Christianity. I'm not innovating anything here. Nothing is new. They've been saying the same things for a long time now, and I can't be any more convincing um, that this is true than anyone else.
I
And
think
we're all
they're
just
in
saying the same things. We just want you to believe, folks. Don't be a jerk.
I
You
think they're in
know,
somewhat of a shame trap. I think that they've invested so
that
much
could
in
be.
it. And I think if they were to leave it now or question it now, they would be ashamed of themselves. And so much of their history they would struggle to give an accounting for. Because
Mhm.
I don't think for John Lennox it really stops at um, why is there something rather than nothing or any of this nonsense.
Right.
I think he takes it to his worldview and what he thinks is right and wrong, who he thinks is right and wrong. And I think most of these Christians, they're in that Christo-fascist camp where they want to dictate the rest of our lives according to their interpretation of their faith. And so I think the salesman is in a position where his livelihood depends on it. So there's a certain amount of consistency that they've constructed. He just doesn't go
Mhm.
there, for lack of a better way to put it, when it
Mhm.
comes to his time of reflection. He's just fully committed to the cause.
Right.
But yeah, I wonder that about so many Christians, if really it's just that sense of being overwhelmed that if they were wrong about this, the downstream consequences are too much. They're overwhelmed.
I think there is that desire not to disappoint the people who've been looking at you and relying on you as a beacon of their own faith.
Yeah, yeah. If you
Yeah,
have to then turn around and go to those people too and say I'm not a believer.
yeah.
That's
I'm
yeah,
sorry, guys. No, like that John Steingard, the singer. People like him have had to stand up and say, "Yeah, folks, I think I was wrong about that." They don't do it to hurt someone else. They do it to be honest with themselves. So
right.
that I think they feel they're more what they can contribute to the world is more valuable at that point where like, yeah, I just got to be honest and tell you guys I don't believe there's a Jesus. Well, it was hard for me to do that with one of my brothers and my mom. Everybody else it seemed to be
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
Like, hey, I'm an atheist. You are? Yeah, I think most people are atheists. They just can't. They just don't understand what they're not defining when they try to talk about
Mm-hmm.
God. Again, to me, the fluffy God isn't a God really, but whatever. You know,
Right,
they don't believe in the
right,
biblical God. They believe in the fluffy God who
right.
loves everybody and
Absolutely.
doesn't start wars and isn't responsible for disease.
Yeah, they put all their eggs in the Jesus basket and can't leave.
And the Jesus basket.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right, gang. Well, this was super fun. Please do remember I'll be on Maya Atkinson's at 9:30 for Bad Science Sunday. Otherwise, there's links in the description if you want to come hang out and gather. It is free. It's free. Just come hang out. That's where we hang out when we're not on YouTube. So, but otherwise, there's links in the description. Like, share, subscribe, do all the great YouTube things. Hey, Steph. Steph, we were plugging your channel earlier. There's links in the description for Stephanie Helms's channel. And again, Stephanie is recently got 200 subs and qualified for the J24 World Championship. So go over there and show Steph some love. But yeah, appreciate you guys. As always, be good to yourselves.
And thank you, Doorknob Head, for writing Pillsbury God. He is risen. I just wanted to say that so long. He is risen.
He is risen.
And take